Question: if the mind doesn't create the world, who does? Well, it seems like a simple question, but it's not really that simple. So I have actually done a video that's called How the World Was Created. And you really want to watch that video if you're interested in this question, because I go into much more depth than I'm going to go into here. But basically what we can say is, we human beings can be in two different states of consciousness. We can see ourselves as separate beings. We can see ourselves as connected beings, connected to something outside our own minds. And when we go into this state of connection, which is actually our natural state, that's where we start, we gradually expand our sense of being connected. But what are we connected to? Well, first of all, we are connected to our higher selves, which exist in the spiritual realm, which is beyond the material world. But eventually, we also connect to our spiritual teachers, which is what I call the Ascended Masters. So when we connect to them, we realize that who created the world? Well, the Ascended Masters created the world. And I explained that in my video about how the world was created. Originally it was started by one created being. Our world was started by one created being called the Creator. But then it's created in different spheres. And it is the beings who ascended in one sphere that created the next. So we are in the seventh of these spheres, and the Ascended Masters in the sixth sphere created our world of form in its original state. And I also explained that the Earth was originally created in a certain state, which is what we can call a natural state, and then we, and many other beings, were sent into embodiment here in order to continue the work. In other words, the Ascended Masters created the Earth at a certain level. It wasn't finished. It wasn't like it is today. And the original co-creators that were sent into embodiment were meant to continue to build on that foundation. But because there came a point where the majority of people on Earth went into this state of separation, they have now collectively taken the Earth to a lower level than it originally was. So that's why there's poverty, lack of resources, war, torture, atrocities like that. This is all a result of a lowering of the state of consciousness. So, if the mind doesn't create the world, who does? Well, originally, planet Earth was created by the Ascended Masters, but the inhabitants of the Earth have co-created, or decreated, you could say, the current limitations that you see on Earth. And so you can say, of course, that the mind of human beings have co-created the current conditions, the limitations on Earth. You can say that it was the minds of the Ascended Masters who created the Earth in its original state. And you can say that our entire world of form was started by the Creator who created it out of its own mind and being. So you can say that. You can say that the mind you can say that the mind does create the world. But there, as I said, it's not just human minds. There's ascended minds, and there's the Creator's mind. There's different levels of ascended beings who are creating the world. But it is all created out of the mind, in a sense, or the Creator's being. And the reason for this is that when you think about it, this is what I explained also in How the World Was Created. So, the material world is made out of a particular substance. You can call it the matter light, you can call it energy. But it's a substance that in itself doesn't have form, but it has the ability to take on any form. But it can't take on form by itself. It takes on form when a self-aware being that has free will, has imagination, has the ability to formulate a mental image. When a self-aware being projects a mental image onto this matter light, then it takes on the form of that mental image. Now obviously an Ascended Master has greater ability to formulate images and greater power to project them upon a matter light. That's why the Ascended Masters can create a planet. Human beings don't have as much of an ability. We can acquire it by expanding our sense of self. But so we are only co-creators, but we can collectively create poverty, limitations, warfare that you see on Earth. So we have some power. And what is it that creates these limitations? It is, as I explained, when we go into this state of separation, we use the duality consciousness to project these images that are based on these two opposite polarities, good and evil, for example, right and wrong, capitalism, communism, so forth and so on. And we are constantly, through our minds, projecting these mental images. And as I explained in many videos, we have 4 levels of our minds. And we are conscious because there's a stream of energy and consciousness coming from our higher self. And it streams first into the highest levels of our mind, which is the identity level. This is how we see ourselves in relation to the world, and whether we see ourselves as connected beings or separate beings, or as spiritual beings or material beings. So first streams into that, the energy and consciousness takes on a certain form there. Then it streams into the next level of the mind, which is the mental level, where it becomes more concrete, more detailed. And then it streams into the emotional level, where it receives a certain energy impulse, a certain direction, and then it streams into the physical and becomes a physical circumstance or a physical action. So from that sense, you can say that we human beings have created the limitations you see on Earth through our minds. But the thing is, you have to realize here, which is something that I really haven't found anywhere else except in the Ascended Master teachings, but it's really an essential teaching. It isn't really the mind that creates the world. It's the being that you are. So you see what I just said. There's a stream of energy and consciousness coming from your higher self. It takes on form in the identity, mental, and emotional levels. That's the mind, right? But what is it that has created the forms, the structures in the identity, mental, and emotional level? It's the core of your being, which is what I call the conscious you. So this is who you are. This is what has free will. This is what has self-awareness. So we can say that the mind is like a movie projector. There are 3 film strips: the identity, mental, and emotional. And the mind projects onto the screen the images that are on the film strip. But the movie projector didn't make those images, right? It's just projecting whatever is on the images. So therefore, you can't really say that the mind is creating the world. It's the conscious you that put those images on the film strips. That's who is deciding what is going to be created. And the reason why this is such an essential teaching is that when you realize this, you can come to experience directly that the conscious you steps outside of the mind, outside of the structures, the contents of the mind. And you realize you are not the mind, you are more than the mind. And this means the conscious you can now consciously and deliberately change the contents of the mind. Change your sense of identity, change the way you think, change your emotional patterns, your reactionary patterns. You can deliberately and consciously change, and therefore you can consciously change what you are projecting upon the matter light. See, if you couldn't do this, you'd be stuck. You just continue to repeat the same patterns over and over. So it's only because you are not the mind. So you can say, from a certain perspective at least, you can say, the mind is just the vehicle. The identity, mental, emotional minds are just the vehicle through which the conscious you is projecting images and therefore creating the world, co-creating the world. But you can, of course, go to a higher level and say, well, the conscious you is still mind, and your spiritual self, your higher self, is also mind, and your ascended masters are also mind, and even the creator is mind. So from that perspective, you can say the mind is creating the world. But I would rather make a distinction, which is, I found this very helpful for myself, to make a distinction between the outer mind, the emotional, mental identity level, and then the being, that is working through the mind. Because then you can separate the being from the mind, and that means the being can now consciously change the mind. If there's no separation there, it's very difficult to change the mind. You can do it to some degree, but you end up doing it by forcing, by disciplining the mind, and it isn't really freeing you from being identified with the mind, which is the goal of spiritual growth, at least one of the goals.